Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 153. I had to think for a second about it.
Yeah.
Um, I am, as always, one of your hosts, emallson, and joining me, we have my co-host, Anomoly.
Hello.
And this week, we have what is probably the final round of Raszageth Nerfs. We're going to talk a little bit about
Should
that,
be.
a little bit about rating. We also have the release date for patch 10.1, and with it,
Yes.
the release of Aberrus, the next raid tier, along with some raid testing, which is still ongoing, and is going to be going on pretty much up until patch release.
Yes.
But before we get into that, Anam, how was your raid week?
Not the greatest, we'll
Mm-hmm.
say. Our Tuesday was spent wiping to Raszageth for
Oh no!
probably about 3 hours. I want to say
Oh
3 hours
no!
15. Yeah, we had clean Arena, clean Diurna, and then did Raszageth and just proceeded to wipe. I mean, we did. So we're trying to basically clean up CEs for everybody, and I
Yeah.
think we tried to push. And then we had 5 brand new people
Oh boy.
in like various roles of like,
Yeah.
we swapped out druids. So like our
We
druid, you know, um, was brand new. Swapped sides for some people, swapped tanks again,
oh
different tanking comp for this will be like the 4th or 5th tanking comp we've had, which then in turn changed our healing comp because our
yep.
paladin who was tanking is now healing. So yeah, it was a rough Tuesday, we'll say. But literally came back Thursday, a chain like dropped it down to just 2 or 3 new people and basically two shot it,
Yeah,
and then cleared the rest of the raid. So
that's about where we kept it, is like 2 3 new people at a time.
yeah,
And we might have done like 4 new people or new people. We had like a healer that was playing their off spec on Raz. They're actually going to be a main healer for us next year. But they went back and played Doomkin for us.
gotcha.
And so it's like they're in a different role. They're on the other platform, but phase one, phase two, and beyond, they've all seen. Like they
Yeah,
know those. They're doing the same things except it's damage instead of healing. But they're otherwise their assignments are the same. Like they're still doing the same mass entangle. You know, they're in the same spots in for sparks and shields for phase two and all of that stuff. So yeah.
gotcha. Yeah, no, we had it was yeah, it was a trying time, we'll say. But then we back cleared, and I think we only wiped. We basically cleared the raid in 2 hours on Thursday. So basically killed Raszageth and then killed every other boss in 2 hours. So
Nice.
it's pretty efficient. So I mean, we should be down to one night this week, but yeah, it was a little bit of a rough week, and we did a couple of new things too. Like we tried the P2 lust on Raszageth. Um, Literally finished the boss like 15 seconds earlier. Didn't really matter.
Yeah.
Like it's not. I think if we were a little bit more focused about how we used it, it's fine. But you chew up like 8 9 seconds of that heroism into the shield anyway. So it's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It
The
does not too crazy of a difference.
yeah, I mean if your um kill time is like 11 minutes or longer, I would honestly still lust phase one.
Yeah.
So
We'll probably continue to do that for sure.
we uh we did not one night clear this week. We have Dathia left, but we are actually not going back to finish it off. We are just hard one night. That's it. Um,
Nice.
and I don't think we've officially said that, but I'm like, oh well, we said we're not coming back for just Dathia this week, but I probably do announcement this week that we're actually just hard committing to one night clearing, and if we're not fully cleared, it just sucks.
Yeah.
Um, but the reason for that is because we tried to do some pretty aggressive changes on Raszageth. More than any other boss, that's what cost us time. Like we had a couple wipes on Diurna, right?
Mhm.
Um, but then we spent over an hour on Raszageth, and that was we started off trying to do 3 heal Raszageth.
Oh, okay.
Um, and 3 heal and just kind of YOLO stuff in the first intermission and see what happens. And sometimes it was fine. We would skip like the first 2 shields, healing absorbs,
Uh-huh.
and that's awesome. But then sometimes we would get both, and so that's not awesome, especially with one fewer healer on that side.
Right, exactly.
Um, and so we ended up going back to 4 heal, running back our strat from last week. The other thing we were trying to change actually was in the second intermission, was ignoring the first set of small ads and killing the first two big ads before their second teleport.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we were trying to do that and we didn't pull it off successfully, and then we went to 4 heal and we just like YOLO pulled it off. Not only did we pull it off, we pulled it off while also killing all of the small ads.
That is hilarious.
So we just like, I don't know, that was just wild.
That's funny. Yeah, because we were killing. I mean, we typically on progression had so we didn't do that. We weren't that quick, but we were able to kill the third ad before it jumped the final time.
Yeah.
Like there was a little bit of confusion, but yeah, our ranged or whoever, we got it low enough in intermission that we were able to kill it without that final jump. So
Yeah.
yeah, those intermissions are, I mean, honestly, a joke. Now I think if we planned out cooldowns a little bit better in intermission 1 on blue side, we could probably get 0 shields on all 3 ad sets.
Yeah.
But like we just didn't change anything. So we got, we got the first and third shield just because everybody grief torches on the second ad. So yeah. But I guess sorry.
Actually the second intermission, I died because I'm playing Death Knight on it, right? And the ad I'm supposed to be like death striking off of to heal myself died. And the other ad is on the other end of the platform, punching me in the face. And now I'm out of range of all the healers because they saw what was happening, and I went to I went from the small ads over to the ad that I normally go to because we were doing the old strat, right? Like that thing is still supposed to be alive. I got there and it's at like 1% health, and we just kill it, and it's like, what do I do now? I started waddling to the other side of the platform, but it was too little too late.
That's funny.
Yeah, that intermission I think actually might be a little bit harder now for people that aren't super disciplined about not killing the ads early, because one of the wipe conditions is you kill one of the ads early but not the other. And you have 2 like enraged big ads going off where they're both getting their stacking debuff, so it's actually just twice as much damage. And that's not really healable. Speaking from experience, because we had it happen. Not really healable.
That's fair. Yeah, I guess we can talk a little bit just about some of the raid nerfs themselves. So there was we'll sort of move this up in the order. There was a couple nerfs to Raszageth this week. I guess they eventually mentioned them, but basically it's a bunch of health reductions across the bosses, right? So like the Raszageth itself got a 5% health nerf, and then basically every ad in the intermission got some sort of health nerf, both in intermission 1 and intermission 2. So that includes all the little ads, the herald, so the red side flame shield ad, the shield itself is less healing, then all the little ads, and then the 2 larger ads, or sorry, I guess 3 larger ads in intermission 2 also got their health reduced by 15%, sort of across the board. And this in turn, like I think we were talking about, just sort of gives you more margin of error within the intermissions, to sort of kill the ads, basically. Let you run the intermission maybe slightly sooner, so quicker. We ran into an issue, by the way. I don't know if you ran into this, but on the Ruiner health reduction, that also reduces the shield that they have.
Yeah, we ran into that too.
What we found is our range just did their typical like plinking it, and that was enough to actually trigger the ads to spawn as a breath was coming. So we're baiting a breath back, everybody. Ad spawn, and then we're late getting there. We ended up getting a shield a couple times in the second set. So
we had to have people just not touch them, basically, because I do this thing. I don't bait the breath with everybody else. I walk forward, so I'm there. But we did have a couple pulls that was actually part of our issue. The heal one, is we're not respecting that, and I wouldn't be there when the ad spawns, and so people just get punched in the face and die. Blood Decay, not known for their snap threat. I have stuff set up for the first 2. Like I use Tombstone AoE burst on the first one to grab threat along with mass grip, and then on the second one I have grabby hands, but then on the third one there's nothing. So if that one gets broken early, like people are just gonna die, and there's nothing I can do about it really because threat sucks.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's rough too. Yeah, because our DK's on our blue side too, so it's always a little sketchy when we pull in. So, but no, I mean, other than sort of our Raszageth troubles, the rest of the raid went perfectly fine for us. So it was not a bad week. It seems like yeah, you didn't have a terrible week either in
Yeah,
terms of clear. Yeah.
we so this is also our healing officer is stepping down from the officer team, so I am now the one doing healing CDs, at least for the moment. So I did healing CDs for the first time this week, and I'll say it mostly worked out fine. Kurog Grim Totem, I've made some mistakes on, but you know, we got there.
Nice.
That is such a weird boss to do healing for. It actually works. So okay, one last diversion, then we'll move on with like the other topics. So Kurog, right? We're getting to the end of the second intermission, and
Okay.
I have like a revival set up at the end of the phase, right? Before the like on the second to last tick, we hit revival. Last tick happens, everybody's at like 10% health in the boss phases. And on the one hand, nobody died to that.
Yep.
On the other hand, everybody's at 10% health going into the intermission. The Disc Priest doesn't have anything to attack. The Holy Paladin doesn't have anything to attack. The Mistweaver doesn't have anything to attack. So there's like, they're all kind of like struggling.
That's funny.
But they were like, after they were like, you know, if there had been one extra tick, we just would have been dead. And I'm like, we know how many ticks there are. There's not one more tick.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it's that fight's funny too, because yeah, that's similar to the way that we run cooldowns. Is like the final ticks are always like the super sketchy ones, and it's like you know there's a cooldown coming, but because everybody drops so low, like in your, at least in my mind, and I bet you my other healers would say the same thing. There's like a mini panic attack you have because you never remember exactly when the last tick is. So it's like there could be another one, so I got to heal everybody up. So there's like always that sort of panicky, like rush at the end. So
and I will say it is hilarious how much better rewind is than revival. Absolutely ludicrous how much better rewind is.
For any sort of major raid damage that you live through but need to be topped up, rewind is absolutely godlike.
Rewind is just insane.
Yeah,
absolutely insane. Oh, your light is on the fritz.
Yeah, I need to. We might. Okay, that's annoying. Hold on one second. Ah!
Pardon the technical difficulty.
All right, we might just be we might go in dark mode tonight or today. So sorry for our video watchers. I'm gonna try and do some stuff real quick. That light's off.
Are you sure? Because it just flickered.
No, we're good now. We're good now. So we'll figure something out real quick. All right, sorry about that.
Open a blank Google Doc on your screen.
That's actually literally what I'm doing on the side screen right now. Oh, there we go.
My God, that's so bright.
Maybe not that bright. We'll make it a little bit lower. All right, there we go. So cool. So now that we have a little bit of a diversion for our video watchers, you will have noticed if you have like epilepsy or some sort of prone to seizures, please don't watch that part of the podcast.
Yeah, I may actually. I don't often actually edit the video version, like the video itself.
Yeah,
I may for that one because that was like, I don't have that kind of issue, but that was really annoying.
Yeah, sorry about that. I need to replace that light. It sounds like finally. All right, cool. Well, back on track on some of the topics from last week. So a couple things to review. I guess we'll start with something not really WoW related, but WoW tangential related. So Ghostcrawler, aka Greg Street, former World of Warcraft, I guess game director, back in like the Wrath-ish era, and previously of Riot, working on as the game director of their unannounced MMO. At least, well, in name, we know they're making one.
No details,
Yeah. So Greg stepped down from Riot about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I want to say now. Cited wanting to like, just actually really decided wanting to get back to his family, having a tough year personally. So being good on him from being able to step down and go back home or spend some more time with his family. But this week he announced that he is opening his own studio. Basically, it will be a remote first studio. Um, and yeah, that's about it. So no other details
Well,
related
opened
to
his
it.
own studio and they're making an MMO.
Oh, that's true. That's true. Um, yeah, so they are making an MMO, and so good on Greg. I think Greg, I always look back on the time when he was the game director at WoW. They used to do those dev water coolers all the time. There was tons of communication from the developers to the players. It was awesome. A lot of behind the scenes, like answering the why they're doing things that I think we're getting back to in this expansion a little bit. But after he left, there was sort of a definite change in the way that Blizzard communicated. So good on him for starting this. And yeah, I mean, it's funny leaving leaving Riot to start your own studio and then work on an MMO. Kind of makes you wonder why he left Riot in the first place.
Yeah,
And
that's
I have
kind
I have
of
a I have a bit of a theory about this.
okay. Okay.
So sorry.
I mean, straight from the kind of thing he wrote, he wanted to go back to Texas, right?
Yeah.
And we're in the middle of what I will politely call a tech sector crackdown on remote work.
Mhm.
And I suspect he probably got told, no, you can't work from Texas.
It's true.
And
Yeah.
said, okay, then I quit.
So that's one way of looking at it. The more cynical view that I have is that I don't know if you've noticed, but Riot's been on a bit of an MMO hiring spree lately, past 18 months, and they've
Okay.
hired a lot of people from a certain other studio that may have been around when Greg was sort of just on the way out of that studio.
Oh, Blizzard.
They
They're
hired a
hiring a bunch
bunch
of
of
ex
old
Blizzard from
ex senior Blizzard dev
the
that
post
started
Ghostcrawler era.
that were either brand new or it started right around when Greg was the game director and was leaving. So like in my cynical view of the world, which I love to take, is that he got out because he didn't like who he's working with anymore.
All
But
right, that is a lot
I
more
don't.
cynical.
I mean that there's probably very little founded on that because I'm almost positive he has a bunch of feedback on like hiring decisions anyway as
Yeah,
EP, right? He was like a good
I
producer.
I would be shocked if he did not have very large control over the design team for the MMO.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I thought that was funny that a bunch of I mean, at the time they left Blizzard as senior devs, but they would have been, just starting or junior developers, right? Around the
Yeah,
time when Greg was around the Wrath time frame. So, and Cataclysm. So, I mean, I just thought it was funny that are a bunch of
yeah.
Blizzard people, Greg leaves. So,
Uh,
yeah, good. I mean, good luck to Greg. I think it'll be interesting to see what they put out. But I mean, like, the biggest problem with these MMO stuff or this MMO announcements is like he's 6 years from releasing a game at minimum.
yeah,
Right? Like, so
yeah.
similar with
It's
like
gonna be a
Riot
while.
and their MMO. Yeah.
Um,
But maybe one day we'll hear. We'll
which
hear.
he did in the tweets did mention that I'm going to quote this. Fortunately, I have found a great strategic partner aligned with this vision, and we are moving forward. So that means somebody's bankrolling this. Somebody is bankrolling the Ghostcrawler MMO.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not sure what that's going to be. I don't know that we have had like uh, uh, an auteur MMO since like Ultima Online.
Yeah.
Like MMOs past the like once EverQuest hit the scene, every MMO past that point that gained any traction was a like AAA kind of scale, just due to the
Exactly.
costs involved. Um, and I don't know that it would be correct to call. I'm gonna continue calling it the Ghostcrawler MMO. To
Yeah.
call that like an auteur one, which for those that aren't familiar with the term, that's like people use that term when talking about film specifically when you have like a director that has a clear and specific vision and more or less complete creative control.
Mm.
So that's the kind of thing that I mean when I say that is like, well, this is going to be in large degree the Ghostcrawler MMO, not the Riot Games MMO or the Blizzard MMO. This is the Ghostcrawler MMO.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. As the lead there. Yeah. Yeah. So it'll be. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what he puts out, but it'll definitely be a while. We'll say so. Um, so cool. The other, I guess, big news is there was a bunch of other hotfixes this week. None particularly hit monks, except a few PvP. There was a handful of Mistweaver changes in PvP, particularly just lowering our overall damage and then lowering the mana return we get from Spirit of the Crane. But what I actually wanted to bring up, because I don't PvP, so I don't actually know what that means. It probably is bad for us, but in any event, the other bigger thing is that they did a ton of healer changes outside of Mistweavers, with some crazy nerfs. So like big one, Restoration Shaman healing nerfed by 5.5% across the board, which is just hilarious because shamans have been widely considered probably on the down themselves and disc
Yeah.
priests in general. So yeah, it sounds like their changes they got hit a little bit above the mark of what Blizzard wanted.
I almost feel
Um,
like that was like the current slate of raid encounters is not very Resto Shaman like stacked healing friendly.
mhm,
Basically, only Karog has relevant healing throughput and also has the raid largely stacked. Like Raszageth, you're pretty hard spread for a lot of the fight. Um,
yeah,
Same thing on Dathia. You're not like hard spread, but you can't stack too hard because of the productive mark mechanic.
yeah.
Um, so
Maybe I
there's
mean Taros would be like the only other one with like the
yeah,
burst healing requirements. You're
yeah,
generally grouped ish up, so
yeah. So like maybe you can do like Resto Shop, but it's like it's two bosses. Where like and every
yeah,
other because they're so heavy on the like stacked healing, they kind of struggle anytime you can't do that. So it's like my impression, at least of Resto Shaman in raid, is that Resto Shaman is not in the greatest spot already, and
yeah.
maybe they're just significant. Like this feels like a nerf because of not PvP Mythic Plus.
Uh,
Like if they're punching above their weight in Mythic Plus, in part because of the Acid Rain stuff.
that's true. Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird. That one surprised me.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. And then they've gone through and done a bunch of different changes on disc, particularly around their power word shield, and then some radiance. Um, so yeah, so there's some changes there, some reductions in mana cost, increases in healing, and then Preservation Evoker getting a little healing bump. Surprisingly, they're getting bumped up by 3%, which seems interesting, along with the living flame change. So some more
Yeah,
healer balance at the end of 10.0.7, probably setting us up for 10.1 and what they want going into the raid. So
yeah.
um,
Another noteworthy nerf. We're going to talk about the zero healer keys later, but Hand of the Protector was nerfed from increasing Word of Glory by up to 250%, depending on the target's missing HP, to up to 100%. So a very
nice.
dramatic nerf to that talent, which makes me sad because that's a fun talent to play. Not very many people play it because it's just like it requires um, a lot of awareness to actually
Uh-huh.
play effectively and have it be the talent point investment because it's not free to pick up that talent right now. It costs 1 point, but you don't normally path up to it. So really, if you want to pick it up, you're spending like 3 points to grab it. So it's got a real cost associated with playing it, and it requires you know actually actively trying to heal. And having a healer that's not gonna snipe the heals that you try and do with wogs, which
Yeah,
if you're playing no healers doesn't exist. So a lot of value.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, so a ton of healing changes. There's some other changes to like different DPS ones and things like that. But I mean, for our perspective, I think the healing ones are just interesting. Seems like they're trying to balance, I think, a little bit more. We'll see. Mistweaver though, still looking really good for 10.1. That bonuses and everything included. Um, so cool. So then next up we have give it ahead a little bit here in our notes. We have a update to the weak aura slash gossip ID for Court of Stars. So this made waves in the MDI,
Yeah.
which basically is the fact that at the end of Court of Stars, you have to find a spy to trigger the next portion of the dungeon. Typically, you have to talk to a bunch of individual NPCs to get clues as to what that spy looks like. Then you talk to that spy and you say, "You are the spy," and then they either say yes or no. And if you get it right, you get to move on. If you get it wrong, you get stunned and sent back out of the room to retry and guess, basically. And so what was found is that apparently the dialogue options, the gossip options, even though the text is the same, the actual spell ID for each dialogue option is different versus when you speak to the spy or versus when you don't. So people wrote a weak aura, checked to see what the spell ID of the option was. If it was the correct spell ID, it would weak aura would automatically select it, and you would then move on to the next phase, which basically meant you just open a dialogue box with each of the people who could be the spy, and it would automatically when they got to the right one.
Yeah. So
Um,
the reason that this didn't exist back in Legion is because the gossip ID, the like ID of the text option, wasn't exposed until
mhm.
relatively recent API changes. I don't know if it was Shadowlands or Dragonflight, but one of those two had some API changes that exposed that information. So now
Yeah.
you can write a weak aura that checks it because now the weak aura can programmatically check that, and I would be a little bit surprised if they don't do something to. I mean, quarter starts is rotating out in a month, so
Uh-huh.
maybe they don't do anything about it. It's really actually not faster for like an uncoordinated group to like run around and click every one.
Yeah, you have to basically assign people. You have to have a whole team
Yeah,
now this week or macro, because you can also do it as a macro. And then assign different groups for each person on your team to go and run to.
yeah,
And that way you're not sort of running over each other. You're efficient in your movement through. So you hit the right amount of groups in a certain order. So
yeah.
um, yeah, they did. So Blizzard did try and fix this. Their hot fix was basically just to change the ID number. And so the new ID number has already been found. Weak auras and
Weak
macros have
auras
been
got
updated.
updated. Yeah,
Yeah. So, but no.
it's
Yeah,
a
I agree
bold
with it.
strategy, but
Yeah, doesn't work that well, Blizzard. But yeah, it seems like they basically have to probably pull back what they're presenting. Although to your point, Curtis Stars goes away in a couple weeks. Um, which we know the exact date it goes away. And yeah, it might not be a huge issue. At least in that dungeon. Maybe there's going to be other dungeons that sort of hit on that. So
I don't think any of next season dungeons have like relevant, dialogue options
yeah,
where it's kind of like a hidden information game.
yeah, I think you're right. The only thing Freehold's in the rotation. I was trying to think of the different weekly events in Freehold might have it, but I think it's just
They're
you
all
run
like you
around.
just
Yeah.
like there was an auto interact one from BFA for Freehold because all you
Yeah.
it didn't you just had to interact with them. There was not like a mini game around finding the right one to interact with. It was just you just found any of them and you
Exactly.
interacted with it.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that is sort of the new week or so. Go and grab it if you're running Quarter Stars over the next couple weeks. Make your life easier in that room. Um, so then next up is for this weekend. Bunch of PTR testing is going on. You get to test out all the new affixes, all the new changes, the different levels of when affixes come in, things like that. So that's going on until Monday. So you'll get to, I mean, get in there and test. I guess the question is, Emallson, how bad is entangling?
I actually did go and do some entangling keys.
Okay,
And I have to say, uh, no bias here. Entangling is exactly as I predicted.
just bad. So
95% of the time, it's just annoying. Like we did a Vortex Pinnacle. The one thing we were concerned about in Vortex Pinnacle was on the last boss where he makes a safe zone and you have to get into it or you die.
uh-huh.
Um, we did have a bad entangling overlap with that, but he channels for such a long time to make the safe zone that it ends up not being an issue. So that was fine.
Gotcha.
Vortex Pinnacle was totally fine. Vortex Pinnacle actually the bosses like have mechanics almost, except for the
Yeah,
last boss. The last boss has I didn't even remember the stars that he summons, and the stars just do ticking raid AoE, and so you just
yeah.
gotta stay on top of keeping the stars dead, or you actually are gonna die. Um, we did it.
But doesn't the third boss have the wind mechanic? Is that Vortex Pinnacle?
Yeah,
Am I thinking? Yeah.
Yeah,
That's kind of hard
but
sometimes. I didn't.
there's no other thing to do. There's like a frontal that you
No,
dodge. There's tornadoes that just exist in the area,
that's true.
and
That's
you
true.
just like, and they nerfed the haste buff slash debuff, so it's not as crazy in
As
Mythic Plus
punishing.
as
Okay.
it is in Time Walking. So you don't
Gotcha.
have to be instantly in the right spot. Um,
Fair enough.
but it's still like a bloodlust, right? If you're in the right area, you have bloodlust. If you're not in the right area, you don't have bloodlust. You have negative
Gotcha.
bloodlust. So you do need to get there, but it's not as bad. I did this on Saturday, which they had done some nerfs to the trash in Vortex Pinnacle. Specifically, the Empyrean Assassins had a poison that did a stacking haste debuff, as well as some damage, and they just stacked it really, really fast, and so your tanks could get negative 100% haste.
Gotcha.
So they removed that poison. We did not like it. Didn't they weren't applying it to me as of yesterday afternoon. Which I don't know. I feel like that might have just been a little bit of an overreaction because the dungeon as a whole was super easy.
Nice.
But then we went and we did Neltharis, and Neltharis is one that we picked because I was curious about the chain boss actually. And
Oh, okay.
Entangling on the chain boss, we did have the overlap where Entangling happened as the chains went out, and honestly, it wasn't bad.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't that bad. There's just so much
Oh.
time. So the key thing here is it doesn't instantly kill you if you're slow.
Gotcha.
And there's not really like a huge punishment for being a little bit slower to get the chains on the boss. That fight
Gotcha.
as a whole is actually super punishing. If somebody dies with their chain, you just can't remove the boss in rage. You don't get the 50% damage increase
Jesus.
phase.
Yeah.
So it's actually very punishing to have somebody die on that fight, but Entangling was not really something that caused people to die. Then we got to Magma Tusk, who is not on my radar, but holy shit, Entangling there was awful. It was
I forget.
everything on that fight one shots.
You have to dodge it all. Okay.
And you're constantly dodging. It's always happening. There's no period where you're not either dodging a swirly that's about to land on you, dodging a magma wave that's about to come from the boss, dodging the boss's charge, which is actually pretty tight timing. Like you gotta be moving. And so it's not the first Entangling that necessarily kills you. It's that you have Entangling that overlaps with a mechanic, and maybe you survive that one, but then maybe you use your movement ability without Entangling up because you are like right next to the bosses. The charge is happening, you just don't have time. And then the Entangling happens and you can't get out of the way of a magma wave and you just get one shot.
Gotcha. So bad positioning
well,
or play.
no, because the magma waves directly are always at people.
Gotcha.
So like we had basically like one, maybe two potential Entangling deaths prior to that point across the two dungeons that we did. And then Magma Tusk, just like multiple wipes where we just had like 3 people die to Entangling. Because like the boss would charge, and we were trying to do this. The boss is actually very highly tuned right now. We were doing it on 20 Tyrannical, so it was like pretty hard. And maybe when we get there on live and we just have higher eye level, it won't be as tightly tuned. It won't be one shots. So in that case, the Entangling gets way less bad because it doesn't just instantly kill you. But as it was on PTR, we were trying to like bait the boss's charge into the wall, kind of like Kragmaw in Underrot, where you would bait it into the skeleton so that it didn't charge all the way across the arena, because it was also a DPS race, and so you needed to kill the boss before it killed you. It's got a soft enrage, all this stuff.
Gotcha.
And that means that everybody was pretty close to the magma waves when they spawned, and so if Entangling came out then, there just wasn't time. You just didn't have time to get out of the way of the magma wave, unless you like, we had a paladin, right? So our comp was actually like pretty favorable for this. I didn't realize this last week, but priests can remove it every time with fade.
Oh, really? I didn't know that either.
Yeah, so priests can remove it every time with fade. So we had a priest, a paladin, me on brewmaster. We had a elemental shaman, and then a boomkin. So like everybody except the shaman has a way to just
Okay.
immediately remove their own, and it still wiped us numerous times. We actually ended up like not completing the instance. It was like me and a guildie and then 3 pugs, and the pugs were just like
Yeah.
not having it. Our affixes, by the way, that key was a level 20 fortified tyrannical raging entangling. So we also found some fun raging overlaps, and there were
Oh,
some of our other entangling deaths were actually like one of the mobs in there has a charge that does a bunch of damage, and it's normally like not gonna one shot you, but then if it rages and you get entangled and you can't get out of it because it's a pretty short cast, um,
right.
then you just die. But it's a trash pack, like you can kind of recover from that. It's okay.
Yeah.
Magma Tusk was the big one where it was just like you just like were at the mercy of entangling happening at a good time, and if it didn't, you're hosed. The other thing is actually entangling doesn't seem to happen outside of combat, but it will kind of like
Okay.
queue up, so the timer will expire, which means that, for example, if you are running back to a boss, you kind of get it at the same points, pretty
Gotcha.
consistently. There's some variance in it in the same way that Quaking had a little bit of variance, so it's not literally the same points every time. But um, that did mean, for example, that the entangling was kind of consistently coming out after one of the boss charges on Magma Tusk, which is just a really hard
Gotcha.
overlap. So there was no like going again and hoping we get luckier with entangling timing. It was like that's when entangling is, and on some level we could probably play around that, but in a key with like 3 pugs on PTR where
It's
there's
tough.
no
Yeah.
gear, no IO, nothing's on the line, like there just wasn't interest. So
Yeah.
I will say that throughout the whole thing, there was no point at which entangling was a fun mechanic. It was always annoying. Always
Fair.
annoying. Um, it most of the time, again, it's gonna be just fine. It's not going to be a problem. But then you have the Magma Tusk kind of situation where it goes from like a 1 to an 11 and just goes from like just an annoyance to actually wiping. And that's just
Yeah.
like that when it ramps up to 11, that is just awful. Um yeah, so also the visual there needs to be, so they do these like screen effects when you're in things you need to not be in sometimes,
Yeah.
where like you'll be standing in fire and you'll get a fire effect around the border of your screen. They need to do that for entangling. They need to give you some kind of border effect, because right now, like, I don't know what kind of sound you would use that would show up in the
Yeah.
like every bit of combat. There's not really a graphic that can show up reliably, I feel like, underneath all the different ground effects that could be happening. But a screen
Right.
border, they could put a screen border up because that's pretty unique and distinctive, and you can just see it very easily. So that's probably because something that happened repeatedly is I didn't realize that I had intent. Like I was just tanking a pack of mobs, can't see my feet, and can't see that I've got entangling, and just like got stunned and almost died.
Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. Yeah. I
Um,
mean, I think in general, like Blizzard, like that's just a Blizzard debuff problem, right? Like,
yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
just have to keep in mind that if you're doing a dungeon with Entangling, you just watch your debuffs a little bit closer. I guess they could always put some sort of like screen flash on there too, but
yeah. I
sort
don't.
of,
So like I was doing Mythic plus Niltharis and Mythic plus Vortex Pinnacle for the first time, right? And so entangling, there wasn't really as much bandwidth for watching the debuffs because I have to watch my feet. Especially like Vortex Pinnacle, not so much. There's really
right.
not like the trash there is very basic.
Yeah.
Um, but in Neltharis, there's a lot of like frontals and ground effects, and there's some cheeky stuff like there's chains you can use to do AoE damage that does both friendly fire damage and a bunch of damage to the enemies. So it's like basically a one shot on players, but it does like half of
Huh.
the trash's health on a 20 side. So it's like very valuable to use.
Yeah.
But we had some fun times with that where there's just a lot going on, and watching your debuffs at least the first couple times doing one of these new dungeons is I don't think a really viable answer. Um, and definitely like there was actually a time that I got Entangling stunned while
Oh,
the trash was raging. I just died. Just died
that's crazy.
to
Yeah.
the 3 second stun. Because you can't dodge or anything while you're stunned. So,
Yeah.
like just
Right.
everything hit me. Um, I died more to my own trinket, the stupid Stormboon trinket, than I died to Entangling.
Oh, it's not a bad defense. Not a bad affix then.
It's it's again like the magma tusk situation. Like that's really the killer thing. Is it's like at least with the storm boon I have no one to blame but myself.
Yeah.
Entangling just like getting a couple people killed to the charge
Yeah.
or somebody like moving out of a puddle that's spawning and they get slowed and they just that kind of thing is just not fun. It's really like
Yeah.
really unpleasant and makes the keys like frustrating.
Yeah.
Um, I will say as well. So I did the first key on a DK. This advanced passive says you can't be slowed less than 70% movement speed, which just actually
Uh-huh.
cuts the entangling slow in half, basically. And
Huh.
that didn't feel too bad. Um, just as far as like annoyance factor, there's something like there's a threshold I feel like where it actually just gets a lot worse. And
Right. Yeah.
50% felt really bad.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, let's move on a little bit from entangling. I know that we've talked a lot
But
about
yeah,
this week and that week.
I did the entangling keys. I checked my assumptions, and I'm not gonna say I'm a prophet, but I was pretty spot on that like most of the time it's fine. Sometimes it just wipes you, and the times that it wipes you are, in my opinion, not worth the affix if just existing in the first place.
That's fair. That's fair. They did make a couple of updates to some of the other affixes too. Most notably, explosive went through a ton of changes. So they've reduced the health of explosive by over 70%, we'll say.
Yep.
So this is a huge amount of health reduction on explosive orbs. They're still immune to AoE abilities, so like you still have to basically target them directly and hit them. But health reduced huge. They also basically made a couple of changes to the way that they spawn. So their spawn rate has been significantly decreased, at least in terms of the Wowhead terminology.
Yeah,
Basically, Wowhead did a bunch of testing, never saw more than 2 explosive orbs
which
in
is
any pack
good.
ball.
That is so
Yeah,
good.
exactly. Then also on top of that, there seems to be an ICD on explosive orbs being added to a pack. So even after you kill one, there is a sort of a small amount of time where another one, will not spawn to replace the one you've killed. So, yeah, I think in general this is a great set of changes. Health reduction was huge. I mean, I think we talked about it last week. You had 8 seconds to kill something that required all of your DPS to swap to it, while also then killing the pack that you're
Yeah,
trying to kill. Would have sort of basically nerfed massive pulls and just required weird healer slash class immunity where like,
yeah.
to get around taking the damage and not killing them. So,
The current
um,
value is definitely something that I feel like in high keys the meta will still be that you just heal through it when possible and you just
uh huh,
DPS stuff. I don't do super high keys, so I don't know if that's accurate. That's kind of the impression I got from people from just kind of watching what people are saying.
yep,
Um, I do feel like in pug keys this becomes a DPS fix though, which maybe is a success because I don't think like
yeah,
the damage that the group takes doesn't scale with key level. It's just based on your health, so it's going to do the same thing in a 15 as it does in a 25.
hmm,
But in a 15, the orb is going to have like a third of the health. Um, Probably still like it's 137k on the 20, which is too much for a healer to really reliably do unless they are dedicated to doing no healing for 8 seconds.
yeah,
Um, but the DPS, that's like a lot of DPS right now are in the 80 to 100k DPS kind of overall on single target. And so they're not going to do that like 100% of the time, but a single DPS at that level should be able to kill the explosive orb in a couple of seconds. So it's going to be like, because there's only two that can be up at a time,
hmm,
um, as long as people are just proactive about swapping to them, you actually just have a ton of time to deal with it as a DPS. And so while this may not make it a DPS affix in high keys, I don't know
Mhm.
that that's ultimately solvable.
Yeah, no, that'll. I mean, I think people will always err on the side, and we can talk probably a little bit more. That's one of the main topics. Always err on the side of like having healers, having DPS focus on doing the most amount of damage, which in Mythic Plus is gonna be a ton of AoE damage for packs, and then everything else becomes a like tank or healer problem to
Yeah.
potentially fix or to remedy.
And
So,
so there's still some stuff where the existence of the orbs could go back to being something that some classes abuse. If you remember right, like back in Legion, it was pretty common for warlocks to farm soul shards off of them, and you had Death Knights with what's it called? The blue ability, the blue execute ability. I don't know, but if something dies while you have it, it gives you a big haste buff. So
gotcha.
if you're playing like a Frost DK and you just switch to it, you give it a killing machine obliterate, which is going to do most of its health by itself, and then you just give it, the blue thing. I
Uh
don't know.
huh.
I don't remember the spell name. Somebody's going to yell at me about the spell name. But it's then you just get like a pretty consistent uptime on that haste buff, and that's kind of like when they had so little health that they just died to anything. It was really
Yeah.
difficult to actually get that. Um, but maybe they do reach the kind of. This is actually kind of similar to the health that they had in Legion relative to
Yeah.
DPS, where it was like a couple seconds, like I would have to double check, but I suspect if you're playing like two-handed blit and you just send a killing machine on one of these, it dies just in one global. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's like this is this is better. I don't know that it's perfect, but it's better.
Yeah, and I think that I mean to me, like the health nerf is big, but then also the spawn rate reduction I think is huge in
Mhm.
terms of just like
That
not overburdening you to continue to swap to different,
yes,
mobs to kill
I
basically. So
100% agree with that. I think that's actually the bigger like
yeah,
the
I would
HP nerf is a big change, but the spawn rate nerf and the cap.
yeah, is I think the larger of those two. So
Yeah,
now good we'll say good changes to this affix. Still a healer affix though.
I
Um
think that the explosive affix is at least one of the better affixes in that book. Not in terms
yeah.
of necessarily challenge, but in terms of like playability.
Yeah.
It the things that always felt unfair about explosive was when you just pulled a pack and then suddenly 5 explosives spawn.
Having to basically get through them all, yeah,
Yeah.
before you died.
And then you get another wave of like 4 explosives because it was like random. Like you would periodically tick and spawn more explosive orbs, and so you got through 5 and you just ticked again and it got 4 more. As opposed to what it could have been where it like ticked once and gave you 2 orbs and ticked again and gave you 2 orbs. Like that's much easier. So
Yeah.
kind of limiting the degree to which you can get unlucky, making it more even, is gonna go a long way towards uh, more playable, less frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, true. And they've also then made changes to I think the other two new affixes. So afflicted got a health nerf to the mobs by about 25%. So this will make it slightly easier to heal them up if needed if you're not going to dispel them or purge them or
Yeah,
whatever the thing that
that's
you can do is.
one thing that I
So
wanted to try that I might get back and do more ETR keys later. Is I wanted to try that as a brewmaster and see how easy it was to just like mouse over details these things.
yeah. Yeah, so that's like probably a better change as you get higher in keys where like you might not have enough dispels for everything,
Yeah,
and so you do have to heal these mobs. No change to their spawn rate though, so still the same spawn rate, just a health nerf
yeah,
on those guys. And then the next the final one is incorporeal. Basically, they just made incorporeal completely immune to damage. So this sort of covers off the fact where we talked about last week, where certain CCs you use against them could be breaking very easily by just AOE
yeah.
damage in general. Because they are totally immune,
You
you
can't break a
can just
polymorph with AOE damage if they're immune to AOE damage.
exactly. So I think this is a great change on incorporeal. Makes your hard CCs a little better, and then also doesn't seem as bad as like if you hit them with hit one with a paralysis and then it gets broken immediately, and now you're on cooldown for 45 seconds, right?
Right.
Um, So cool. So that was sort of the Mythic Plus sort of affix updates along with testing currently ongoing. So you can jump into PTR even right now until
Yep.
Monday, and do your testing. There was also raid testing this week. So Thursday and Friday saw a handful more. Or sorry, Thursday saw some heroic bosses along with 2 mythic bosses. Friday saw a mythic boss, and then they did open normal this weekend. So the normal version of the raid is open currently for you to jump in there and test some things. So I don't know,
Yep.
Emilson, did you get a chance to do any raid testing this week?
I did testing on Thursday. Our group did not have enough people to do testing on Friday. Um, and then I have not done the normal testing, but from what I've heard, the normal testing is basically undoable due to a couple of issues. Forgotten Experiments on normal has an issue where sometimes the third boss just won't spawn, so you just can't kill the fight, and then you can't progress. And then
Gotcha.
Assault of the Zakali on normal. There's an ad. There's an ad that spawns. We did this on heroic this week, and it did work on heroic. But there's an
Uh-huh.
ad that spawns that has a shield, and as long as the shield holds, it's very much like Raszageth. As long as the shield holds, you get pulsing AoE damage, so you need to break the shield and then kill the ad. On heroic, the shield was like a complete joke. It was a non-mechanic. You just get the ad.
Right.
Apparently, they tuned it up, and on normal, they were getting like huge shields and just dying.
Oh geez.
So
Jeez.
I people that got through Forgotten Experiments, I know there are people that also got through that, but it was not very like bug friendly,
Uh-huh.
let's say. So a lot of groups just didn't get through Assault of the Zakali, which means you can't do Reshok the Elder and then progress through the rest of the raid.
Gotcha.
Um,
Yeah. So more issues with testing, we'll say.
yeah.
Yeah.
But Assault of the Zakali, aside from like we got stuck in combat once and the boss didn't reset, so we had to like um, leave group, log out, and like get when you log back in because you're in the raid's in boss combat, it kicks you out of the instance and then
Uh-huh.
reset and go back. All during heroic testing on Thursday, that was the only issue we really had with that fight. The fight worked. Um, it's a sort of Hellfire Assault style thing. There's waves of enemies. The kind of gimmick mechanic of the fight is that the boss does a smash that breaks rocks, and you can pick
Okay.
up the rocks, and the ads that are coming for the next wave are climbing up the sides of this platform. So you can take the rocks and throw them off and prevent the ads from spawning. Which, at least initially on like launch week, you're gonna want to be doing because you will get overwhelmed. If you don't use the rocks at all, there are a lot of ads. We didn't use the rocks initially, and we just got overwhelmed. Um, but then, uh, in a few weeks of farm, you just won't need to use the rocks, and it'll be a complete AoE fiesta.
Gotcha.
Um, but then there's also that fight. It's a two-phase fight. The first phase, the boss jumps back and forth in between two platforms that are connected by like a bridge, basically. It's not a
Okay.
bridge, but we'll call it a bridge. Um,
Yeah.
and so you kind of like break the raid up into two teams, and when the side that doesn't have the boss on it gets extra ads, so
Okay.
you really need to be using rocks on those, and then the side that has the boss plus some ads. So the first phase ends when the boss reaches 15% health, and then he goes and he tries to break down the door, and you just got to kill the boss before he breaks the door. There was
Okay. So
one
the
other
thumbs up,
bug
yeah.
actually that we ran into. It didn't prevent progressing the boss, but it did make it so it was hard to judge what exactly was supposed to happen. Um, he's supposed to do damage to the door, and he just wasn't. The door was immune,
Oh, okay.
so it was impossible to fail that phase. So we kind of
That's
hung out
hilarious.
in phase 2 for a while, just like testing things, seeing like, okay, who can solo? There's a meteor soak on the door. Who can solo that soak? Turns out tanks can do it very easily because it's physical damage. Um,
Oh,
so that was a thing. But also we had to like hard stop damage as soon as we hit phase 2 because 15% health on the boss is just not very much. So like
yeah.
if you were gonna just like do the boss for progression, 15%, you just kind of like just dies before he does anything.
Gotcha.
Which may be PTR tuning kind of things, right? Like they may have
Yeah. I mean,
undertuned the boss's health just so people could see the second phase.
Uh-huh.
Because they knew people would do like we did and just hard stop damage and check out the mechanics. But that's definitely like a potential tuning issue where 15% health is just not very much.
Yeah, no, for the other final stands. Yeah.
Then we did 2 mythic bosses. There was the Amalgamation Chamber Mythic, which is the like fire and shadow elementals. And it's basically the heroic version of the fight. But there were some pretty significant changes to how the debuffs worked. So now the debuffs, before they applied like every 10 seconds. Each stack did more damage. They like cut the damage in half. It applies every 5 seconds now. But importantly, it's also a permanent debuff.
Okay.
So you can't naturally drop it with something like AMS like you could before. You just have to basically the way it works is it's almost like Anduin. Not the part of Anduin where touching somebody with the same debuff just like wiped the raid. But the part of Anduin where touching somebody with the opposite debuff lets you clear yours. It turns it from a permanent debuff into a 20-second long debuff that will naturally expire. And then, so that's how you reset your stacks. The issue that we ran into is that you can only clear on another player. So if there's an uneven number of players with debuffs, you just have somebody that can't clear their debuff.
Oh, wow.
And so that was a little bit of a problem. It was kind of weird because there's like each boss mechanic also applies stacks. So it felt like you should be able to, for example, if you have the shadow debuff, go and soak one of the fire meteors. And that should like start your shadow debuff ticking down so that you can clear it without needing to have an exactly equal number of people.
Right.
But otherwise, like, it's just the heroic. That was the one big change. Was it just your debuffs now function different.
Gotcha.
But also without there being a Eye of the Jailer's style, you blow up the raid mechanic that punishes you for getting both. Definitely a like Shadow Priest Boomkin kind of like sit in the middle and dot both, do a ton of damage angle. Maybe not on prog, but 100% on farm. And 100% less frustrating. You could do that on Eye of the Jailer too, but what it required is all of the range. You know, they would go and they would get their debuff from one side, and then they'd go to the middle, and they had to stay close enough to the one that they kept their debuff.
Yeah.
But then they could you know, DPS both to some degree. It's very frustrating to try and actually enable. Since you're not going to blow up the raid doing this, it's not as frustrating. Imagine that.
Fair enough.
And then we had the Forgotten Experiments. So this one is the kind of 3-boss one. You go through 3 bosses. The first one is basically General Call. It's just General Call. The second one, it puts debuffs out on people that spawn orbs when they expire and jump to a new target. So you get more and more debuffs throughout the phase. And the orbs do pulsing AoE damage until you kill them. But importantly, the boss does a big raid AoE event. And every orb that is up when it happens replicates the damage.
Gotcha. So you have to keep the orbs under control.
You really cannot have any orbs alive when that happens, or you just die.
Yeah.
And then the third one has like a Halandris kind of goalie mechanic, except that you get a stacking debuff, kind of like Raszageth for soaking the tornadoes every time you bounce the ball. The biggest issue we ran into on this fight is on Heroic, every boss comes out after you kill the previous one. On Mythic, they come out at 50%.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
And so we just had a really difficult time figuring out a good way to manage that because of just how long you still have the previous boss when the second one comes out. And it just kind of creates very messy overlaps because it does actually end up with some push timer stuff, where like depending on when you push, you might have an overlap of the like rending charge that the first boss does with the raid AoE damage that the second boss does, and so that's really difficult to survive without a really strong defensive.
Gotcha.
And things like that. It almost felt like either the bosses had too much health, which I don't necessarily think so. I don't think the bosses had too much health, but it felt like maybe 50% health was too high for them to come down. But then it's
Yeah.
also PTR. Our comp is very scuffed. I was doing tank damage. I was not playing tank, playing DPS,
Yeah.
at least in theory. Um,
Yeah.
so it's hard to say if that's just like again, like PTR issues, like scuffed group comp, scuffed players, meaning me doing tank damage on the mage,
Yeah.
or what the issue was. So we'll see. That one I have some concerns about because it could. There's nothing that seemed like SLG level. You just die now, kind of bad overlap. But you
Right.
can
Right. Right.
definitely, depending on when you push, get some harder overlaps than others. But again, it's supposed to be
Gotcha.
like third boss or something, so it shouldn't be that hard. But yeah, definitely
Fair enough.
the 9 or something like that. It's just a completely trivial third boss.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. That's good. So other than normal, it sounds like maybe like one or two other bugs. Sounds like
Yeah, I
decent set
mean
of testing.
the mythic
So
bosses
cool.
worked great on Thursday. No real bugs that we ran into, just like weird tuning stuff, and
Cool.
the debuffs on amalgamation chamber being very unintuitive in how they worked.
Right.
Um, it was just really not clear how they worked. Dungeon Journal hadn't been updated, so we were kind of like trying to figure it out. And like I thought it worked one way, other people thought it worked another. It turns out we were both like partially wrong,
Yeah.
and it like I was more wrong, but at the end of the day, it was just really confusing. So
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, cool. I mean, I guess we still have a couple more weeks of rate testing, and we'll talk about that. But sounds like we're
yeah,
getting close, and we need to probably clean up some of those weird bugs,
S-
and then
s-
we'll see on live
speaking
what the
of,
overlaps potentially looks.
you know,
Yeah. One more thing before we get into the actual release date. So they
okay,
did come out with a blue post about the raid, and about BOEs in the raid.
yeah,
So basically, mythic BOEs or items that are set to be mythic BOEs will actually drop as BOP. So very similar to what happened in the opening raid. God, I can't. What's the name of it? I can't even remember right now.
Hmm?
What raid are we in?
All to the
Anyway,
incarnates.
yeah, vaults. Sorry, Jesus, I couldn't. I blanked. I was like going to say Sepulcher. Not this. So yeah, so vaults, just like in vaults. For mythic only difficulty, the BOEs will be bind on pickup. For the probably the initial couple weeks, and then eventually they'll move them back to be bind on equip items. Um. So yeah, so that is the quick update. They basically confirmed that um today. So or I guess over the weekend. So. But cool. I guess now on to some of the I guess the larger topic is we have a release date for 10.1.
Yeah,
And it's a lot sooner than I thought, just based on a lot of the feedback I've gotten in terms of the raid testing and sort of stuff like that. But yeah,
May
um, te-
2nd.
yeah, 10.1 is May 2nd, with the raid coming out May 9th, the week later. So May 2nd for all, the new zone, the new faction, the new assault things. Season 2 starts, or no,
No,
sorry,
no,
not yet.
not yet.
Sorry, just all that. And then also cross faction guilds coming in
Yeah,
May, which
oh,
I think
that's
is
gonna
the
be
biggest
nice.
thing. I can't wait to be gnome. I'm so excited.
We have
But yeah, so
I can't
sorry.
wait to not have like not have, but like several of our players just in a guild where like manually trade Vantis runes and all
Yeah.
that stuff.
That's awful.
We
So yeah, so
can,
cross faction guilds would be fun. So
yeah.
um
So season
so
2 then starts May 9th. So it's a week later. We have basically a dead week at the start of the patch. You can still get cutting edge during that if you're working on it.
mhm.
But I believe the May 2nd end of season 1 cutoff is what applies for the Mythic Plus season titles, the PvP titles and mounts, all of that stuff.
Uh-huh.
So that's a pretty close cutoff actually, and does kind of like we got the big Raszageth nerfs. It's not nerfed anywhere as hard as the other was a joke after the nerfs. Um,
Yeah.
but it,
I removed P3 from that fight.
yeah,
The
and
Nerfs.
and P4 basically.
It's true, actually. True.
Um, but yeah, that the probably final round of nerfs hit Raszageth this week. That's in line with like, okay, there's a month left. Try and shepherd a bunch of teams through the end of the tier. There is actually, so related to that, there has been a spiking in kills over the past week.
Okay.
We went from, so over the past like month, there'd been like 40 to 50 kills a week.
Okay.
And this week, there were 85. So
Double.
mission success, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah. They those nerfs are big and they want to get people through. I think I saw a graphic too that was talking about like Raszageth is like the least killed mythic end boss.
In a
In like the
while,
past
yeah.
like yeah, like two or
It's
almost three full expansions. So
there. So that's an interesting one because it's also Aranog is the least killed mythic entry boss in a while.
yeah, so I think it's just lower amounts of people actually rating because there's probably other stuff you can do with the game, which is
Yeah,
interesting. So
yeah,
but yeah, we have the release date, and then of course with the week after, so May 9th will be Mythic Plus Season 2 starting, along with the raid opening, and it's all difficulties again.
yeah,
I don't know if you mentioned that. So it seems like all difficulties is going to be the thing moving forward. I felt a little FOMO, we'll say, for like the first couple weeks of being in a guild that only raids 2 days a week, and
yeah,
we still spent like I mean, ultimately, like we will follow very similar to what a lot of the world first guilds will follow, in that it is better use of your time to farm tier sets than to just get a mythic boss kill. So
yeah,
like, if you still have people in your raid that need tier sets, you should still be killing bosses that you can kill that drop tier, right?
yeah,
Which is generally going to be and like later in the instance heroic bosses. So
yeah. And um, one important component of this season versus season one is that we're going to be entering it with much higher item level relative to the
yeah,
raid. Um, the if you remember the preseason item level for season one was around 380, unless you did degen like treasure farming and stuff, in which case you could
yeah,
get up to like
rare farming.
385, 386, 387, which is below normal. That's below normal eye level. Uh,
Yep.
whereas what we're going into season two with typically is around like I'm eye level 420 on my DK. My monk that's my alt is eye level 450. Normal next tier will drop lower than that to start with. The later bosses might drop close to that, but
Right.
there's not going to be like the situation that we ran into last tier where normal Vault of the Incarnates was just like plus 10 eye levels over anything that dropped, anything that you could get prior to the raid
Yeah.
releasing. Which also just means that your initial clears are going to be easier. Heroic is going to be easier in terms of numbers. Mythic is going to be easier in terms of numbers. Um, but also, it's going to take um, less time to get geared up to the new heroic level because you're starting from a higher point.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Um,
mean the longest, I think you're right in terms of just overall gear, but I think you're still gonna want to pick up those tier sets. So
oh
like
yeah, 100%.
regardless of
That's still
yeah,
correct. That's still 100% correct. It's just going to be easier to do now than it was
hopefully, yeah.
in season one, where like more guilds will be able to reliably get through the tier bosses. Week one, aside from potentially the end boss, on
Right.
heroic and normal, and pick up all of the tokens instead of what a lot of guilds ran into in season one, where they kind of got gear checked on some of the Endwing bosses and didn't get through all of them. I think most like higher end CE guilds um, got through maybe not AOTC, but the first eight, which is all your tier bosses in week one.
Right.
Um, but that was not a super common thing. That was very much like a 1% kind of thing. Like I think we got AOTC week one. We might have gotten it week 2. I don't remember.
I don't
Um,
remember. I think we got Raszageth week 2, like on an off night, like because
yeah,
we since it's all flex. I mean, we generally actually raid like every night. We have enough people on
yeah,
those first 2
fair
weeks, so
enough.
just to make sure we get it down. But yeah, um, yeah, no, it's another great. I mean, not a great, but it's another just difference that we'll have to keep in mind in terms of like everything coming out at once. And um, it seems like this will be the new direction for Blizzard. I think they like this.
Yeah,
So we will probably continue to see it. So
yeah. Important note. So we mentioned the Omni tokens before. There are 3 Omni tokens ish up for grabs week 1 that most guilds will have the ability, like feasibly get. You have the one from normal scale Commander Sarkareth, one from heroic scale Commander Sarkareth, which we actually don't know for those if it's going to scale with group size or not. I hope it does, because otherwise we're going to be kind of pressured into doing like 10 splits, which is stupid.
yeah,
We shouldn't be pressured into doing that, but having like literally double the amount of tier tokens from those bosses is kind of a lot. And then also everybody in your raid gets an Omni token for getting ahead of the curve.
yeah,
Either ahead of the curve, or I don't remember if it's 2000 or 2500 Mythic Plus score.
2,500. I'm pretty sure
Okay.
it's higher than the just getting them out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
getting KSM.
So that's gonna do a lot for getting people tier. Like everybody just getting a free Omni, like literally your entire raid. That
Yeah,
is, if you go by the numbers, playing in like a 20-person, let's say you're clearing with like 25 people in heroic, that is legitimately like a month's worth of clears worth of tier token.
yeah,
It is so many tier. It is worth much less for like world first guilds where they are doing splits, so those tier tokens that they get are, they're doing a larger raid size where fewer people are getting the gear.
yeah,
Versus us, where like we're doing it with 25 people and we want the gear for everybody in that 25 people. So that's a lot more valuable for guilds at like our level.
yep,
But yeah, that's gonna be very valuable, and hopefully will mean we don't need to do as much heroic farming sets.
yeah. Yeah, let's hope so with these Omni tokens. And it also helped just being able to give people like 4 set off the last boss once they're starting to farm,
Yeah,
which will be nice, where we're not like because I ran into the situation where I needed gloves, and so like after you kill Senarth drops gloves, right?
yeah, it's other drops
It's like
gloves.
my week is done. I'm no longer excited about
Yeah, yeah, we
getting
ran into
4
that
base,
same
so
thing. Venerated gloves off Senarth just did not
yeah.
exist.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, yeah, I mean, we've covered a lot of the 10.1 stuff already. So like the different zones and some of the new systems. So I'm not going to spend too much time for the remainder of this call to talk about that. But there was a handful of 10.1 specific things. Just wanted to sort of cover as it comes up. So the first one is Blizzard is combining the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame is now the first 200 guilds, regardless of faction, to kill Scale Commander Sakareth will get the Fame Slayer title. So one of those first tops.
So, funny side effect of this, it actually makes it harder to get into Hall of Fame now. So my
Yeah.
guild would have gotten Alliance Hall of Fame if we were Alliance. We were World 342.
Yeah.
So we're 142 ranks off of getting Hall of Fame, but we would have gotten the Alliance Hall of Fame tier
Yeah.
if we had been Alliance. So there are going to be Alliance guilds that were consistently getting Hall of Fame that are no longer going to get, as the threshold moved up by 100 ranks. There are going to be Horde guilds now that were not getting Hall of Fame that now will get Hall of Fame in place of those Alliance guilds, because
Right.
they were in the, world 140, 150, 160 range and just like missed the cutoff by a week or
Right.
um so that's going to be that's going to be a little bit chaotic.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this shakes out in terms of like what guild slots where. I think I mean, I think if you're in a Hall of Fame guild, at least a Horde guild already, you pretty much have zero to worry about. I think it's just, when you're on the cusp, particularly like, later alliance kills or even just in general, Horde guilds that may have in the past been, missed out on Hall of Fame by a week are now in. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. One big list, top 200, you get the achievement. So cool. And then the one other topic just on 10.1 is there's a new vendor coming in the Zaralek Caverns. Goes by the name of Ponzo. And the interesting thing about Ponzo is Ponzo sells essentially artifact knowledge points. So there's the ability to use these barter bricks that drop you content plus a couple other stuff, and you can purchase knowledge points along with a bunch of other profession stuff from not only this vendor but there's a second vendor, Misty, that sells some recipes. So just keep that in mind, if particularly if you're bringing up alts or bringing up a different character and need the knowledge points. Ponzo has your items, which is funny because it sounds a lot like Ponzi scheme when I say it out loud. So.
This is this is kind of taking the place of the Artisans Consortium vendor that currently sells knowledge points for currency. I'm blanking the name of the currency.
I don't know. Sorry, I was.
It currently sells it in 2 batches of 5, which is exactly what this guy does. You can get up to 10 knowledge points from this, so it's not like a forever grind. It is, you can get 5 knowledge points for each of your professions, and then you can get another 5 for each of your professions without spending your rare like weekly limited resource that you have to use for doing high-end crafts guaranteed, which is nice. So that should actually reduce the incentive for people to gamble on rank 5 crafts and instead just rank 5 crafts and charge a higher fee.
Yeah.
Which will be nice because gambling sucked. That was like one of the worst parts of crafting in Temple was the like, I want to rank 5. How many times am I going to have to get this recrafted to get a rank 5? I don't know. It could cost me 2,000 gold. It could cost me 200,000 gold. Let's find out.
That's funny. Yeah. Yes, I mean it nice little catch up here. Just mechanic, and then a couple, like I said, a couple of new recipes too for the group. But just want to highlight, yeah, if you need more knowledge points, which I am terribly behind in my professions.
I don't think they added new like things to spend knowledge points on though, right?
No. There's no changes to the underlying professions. It probably just allows you to quicker, or it gives you both two things: catch up from an alt perspective if you want to change. That way, you're not missing on all that, and then also just to help you close out any sort of open things you might have on your mains.
Yeah. So like I'm at the point on my monk with leatherworking. I can craft every mail item, every leather item, every primordial item, and I can do almost all of them at rank 5.
Go. Wow. Okay. Fair enough.
And so this is like, I can't guarantee most of them to rank 5 is the thing. I can only gamble most of them to rank 5.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So, but this is going to be something, this will be a little nice bump. Mine with just other weekly knowledge sources to finish that off and get to the point. I can actually guarantee everything.
Nice. Well, very cool. Well, cool. Yeah. So that's sort of some of the upcoming vendor stuff in 10.1
You
cool.
got this exciting. This
is my final topic.
Yeah.
The one a little bit more time on, but so switching gears slightly, and this is sort of coming out of MDI last week, and then people sort of making a big deal about this. But essentially, in MDI last week, there was a key that was healed, a key that was run without a healer. And so this is sort of an interesting take, but and then sort of as people dive more into it, it's actually the fact that like we've seen 28 tyrannical Court of Stars completed without healers, right? Or other keys are being done.
Shattered Moon also got done
without healers. I mean, a 28 is extremely high level key. Like that's not a baby key, and so not having a healer is an interesting position to be in when you look at something that's 4 DBS in a tank.
This is not the same as, before anybody brings it up, not the same as year old like we're gonna do a 15 or even a 20 with 5 tanks, right?
Yeah.
Like those happen every season, but that's like weekly key territory, not 28s, which are just a level below world first keys.
Exactly. Yeah, and so it brought up a bunch of discussion both in the community, a bunch of people tweeting back and forth, and then Wowhead Tettles from Wowhead did a little bit of a write up, and I mean it's an interesting conundrum that it's an interesting conundrum just because of the way that you have to balance this out, right? The ability to do a key without a healer essentially means there's little limited to no healing, right? And
Yeah,
so there's sort of this balancing game with Blizzard where in Mythic Plus, because you only have a single person that generally is able to like main heal or to be a healer, right? In this regard, you kind of have to balance a lot of the damage and healing and damage required or damage that goes out, healing required to heal up that damage, and then some sort of utility around that too,
yeah,
right? And it puts you in a very specific case of where, and it's honestly this is most of the reason I don't like Mythic Plus is I don't like being the only healer because it's a lot of pressure and you're sort of like most groups will wipe and blame a healer before anyone else.
yeah.
And so the problem with this is that you end up in keys that have just extremely high healing requirements, which means only certain classes can then make those healing requirements because not every healing class is made the
Right.
same.
It's not
Um,
like the situation in Raid where it doesn't really matter whether you're playing the best healing comp or the worst healing comp in like a environment, which is
right.
what most people pug. You don't really pug the late. Um, Whereas there's no real limit to what you can pug in Mythic Plus. Not at least that most people will practically run into, but they will run into the keys where it's high enough that having the worst healer versus the best healer is possible.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean there have been even now like there have been healing checks and Jack went through this, right? Where like there's just a portion of there's a boss or a mechanic in a dungeon that requires a specific amount of healing to get through. And as a healer, you either do that or you don't. And if you don't do that, you are not running that key.
Yeah,
Right. Which is sort of it's honestly I think generally a bad problem, right? In terms of like you then limit what healers you can play towards the top end. And I realize that like at the bleeding edge, there will always be a class or set of classes that dominate just based
right.
on their kit and what they have. But like we see this today from like a Mythic Plus perspective in monks where like they are generally, considered a lesser class. Although it's funny, somebody in Peak Lounge has the data to back up that actually most healing classes are made the same. If you start to take away a lot of the noise in the data. But yeah, it sort of runs into this problem of okay, they Blizzard to allow people to continue to like push keys in a class they want, they have to lower these healing checks. And eventually they lower them enough that you no longer need a healer. Right. And so it's an interesting balancing act. I personally am all for like things doing more damage in general and like having healing being a requirement.
Yeah,
Um but there's also the check of like that then puts a ton of stress on someone throughout an entire key. If like
yeah,
your group is basically a wrong cast decision away from wiping, right? Which is like what you never want to have. You never want to be like,
yeah.
if I healed person A instead of person B, we live based on the way the damage went out versus like, hey, I healed person A, so we wiped because I picked the wrong person in like the half second I had to make a decision on who to
There's
heal.
a
So,
so Nokud is a pretty good example of this with both the lightning boss and the final boss having pretty expensive healing checks. Electrical storm on the lightning boss,
yep.
um, requiring your healer basically originally to have 10 stacks of the buff that increases healing and damage done, which meant that your party actually had to participate in allowing your healer to stack and maintain that buff leading up to the electrical storm, or you would just die. But a lot of
Yeah.
pugs would not let you do that, and you could get away with less on like a resto druid. Resto druid could do it with less than a
Mhm.
resto shaman, and something like a resto shaman has the extra added problem, and Invoker actually has the same problem of the arena being kind of set up where people naturally spread to play goalie with the orbs. But really, for those healers during the electrical storm, you want people to be more or less stacked, so that they can be healed. But the resto druid again doesn't have that constraint. Um,
Right.
so people can just kind of like YOLO with a resto druid on that and do it. And while a Resto Shaman or a Preservation Invoker can both do it, they both require your group to actually be aware of their like healer and help their
Yep.
healer. And from a pug perspective, that ain't happening. That
No.
ain't happening.
No, exactly. So yeah, I mean, it definitely, the conversation is now like sort of a little bit more front and center around like healers in Mythic Plus, like what exactly is their job, right? And like if you can get past a healing check without a healer, then like you of course bring another DPS, right?
Yeah.
And there's a compounding issue here, that you also see that DPS now bring certain DPS classes will bring minor healing also, right?
Some of them
That
bring
might be
major
just
healing.
enough. That's true. I mean, like I
Uh,
guess yeah,
so this
ancestral guidance is pretty strong for enhancement, right? So
right. So this key quarter stars that Nerf did with zero healers, it was a protection paladin, which of
yep,
course it brings Hand of the Protector and Wog, um,
yep,
and Sack and Bob and Spell Warding. So like protection paladin, very good
lots.
for this. Um,
Yeah.
and then it had an enhancement shaman. So that's your enhancement shaman AG. That's I think a 90-second cooldown, or is it a 2-minute cooldown? Anyway,
2 minutes. 2
2
minutes.
minutes does a ton of healing. A ton of
Yeah.
healing. Good enhancement shaman can more or less solo the healing absorbs with AG on Mythic Raszageth. For like context on how much healing it does a lot.
Yeah.
And then a Shadow Priest, which brings Vampiric Embrace. Not as good at like burst healing as the AG, but lower cooldown, longer duration.
Yeah.
And then it brings a Windwalker, which kind of doesn't have anything. But you know they bring
Other than being fairly tanky,
yeah.
right?
I mean
Some
yeah,
karma and their
kinda.
defensives.
Karma, Diffuse Magic, Divine Harm, Fort Brew. Yeah, they got a lot going on for them now. Plus
Yeah.
the ability to like instant vivify themselves for free periodically. So that helps. And then Demon Hunter, which is actually just like Havoc Demon Hunter is ludicrously tanky. Uh, and has like they don't really need a lot of help on their own for most things. Like you're looking at so the third boss of Quarter Stars is actually going to be the scariest probably in this scenario.
Yeah,
But
with the flyers, yeah.
it ramps up the damage over the course of the counter. If you just kill it 25% faster, you don't need as much.
Yep.
You,
Exactly.
then you probably get through that with your AG plus your Vampiric Embrace plus the Wog healing help keeping people topped. And like from a like tank perspective, from like a protection paladin perspective, this happens because of Hand of the Protector being, and also because protection paladin just has a resource glut, like Blood DK does as well. Blood DK can't funnel it into healing other people; they can just funnel it into more damage. That's your only option.
Right.
Protection paladin,
Right.
you can funnel it into more damage through more Shield of the Righteous casts, or you can funnel it into group healing with Ward of. So this is
Yeah.
where we mentioned earlier, Hand of the Protector got nerfed from 250% increased healing to 100% increased healing. This is basically why.
Yeah. Part of the reason this, yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, this like the overall, the reason I wanted to bring this up and sort of the question really probably to the group and to everybody is like from a healer perspective, this definitely sucks in terms of like essentially being replaced by a bunch of DPS, right? I don't think this will end up being a widespread problem. I think to that point, like this requires a ton of group coordination. So
Yeah.
I don't foresee your weekly 15s all of a sudden no healer runs being like dominating.
Yeah,
Um,
this is very much like I you know how I was mentioning like Evoker and Resto Shaman on that lightning boss requiring like your groups to help your healers.
yeah,
This requires your groups to help each other. And again, like your weekly pugs are not going to do this.
exactly. Yeah, but the other side of it too that I sort of appreciate is the fact that like there are other classes that can help support healing, right? So, and I don't want Blizzard to take that away
Yeah.
because like VE and Nature's Vigil, particularly Nature's Vigil under cooldowns from a Moonkin is like a fairly solid amount of healing,
Yeah.
right? That goes out onto individuals across the raid. So I mean,
Feral Druid, Nature's Vigil also pretty good.
gotcha. Yeah. So I mean, uh, uh, at the end of the day, this is definitely an interesting sort of piece around more, I'd say less at the top end, but more about just how Blizzard goes about designing Mythic Plus dungeons in terms of like, what exactly is the healer's overall role? Is it just to heal up damage, which then means, okay, you will need to input specific healing checks, whether that's on trash or bosses, or and this is where you get into like, do healers care about this, right? Is like, or is the healer's role more like a support role where they heal, but then also do other things, right,
Yeah.
within a dungeon?
And
And
this
like,
is kind of where we end up with stuff like explosive just being a de facto healing
yeah,
affix, is because the healer doesn't have to spend the time healing and they don't contribute damage that's on the level of an actual DPS. They are the one that makes the most sense to just sit there and one shot explosives.
exactly, exactly, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, we'll see more. Potentially this. I mean, I think at this point in the season, it's sort of a moot point in terms of like
Yeah.
it, it's not going to trickle. It doesn't seem like it's going to trickle down into the larger population just yet. But as we learn more about next season, and I think this community, the community in WoW is generally like they find an idea and they're fixated on it maybe a little too much until they get bored. And I think this will be definitely a season 2 thing where you will start to see more and more people try and push no healer keys
Yeah.
and see how far they can go. Which, if you play healer and you love Mythic Plus, maybe not the best thing.
Yeah.
Because a lot you don't be able a lot of pugs are
So
going to go for that 4 DPS one. So
I will say that I don't like that they nerfed Hand of the Protector so much because I think it's a really fun thing to have access to. I think that playing Protection Paladin and having the ability to send out these huge walks on people is super fun.
yeah,
But in the state that Protection Paladin is currently in, where they're very tanky and they don't need those extra resources for themselves, it is probably too strong. So I understand it, but I would like to see it come back in the future when Protection Paladin is no longer in that state.
uh-huh.
Um, but I also think there's an inequality in not healers per se. I mean, yes, healers, but like it's not in healing like raw numbers throughput. I think it is very much a like mechanical issue with certain healers versus
How
the
they
boss
heal.
encounters. Like to go back to Nokud, not the lightning boss I already talked about, but like the last boss, the healing check, the major healing like do or die check there is when you have the intermission where the 4 casters are up and there's a bunch of damage going out. There's ticking raid damage. There's people getting blasted by storm bolts because people aren't kicking them and stopping them. All this stuff. Um, and you also cannot stand and cast.
Yeah.
And not only can you not stand and cast, other people are not going to stand and cast because if you group up, you bait all the lightnings into the same area and then you kill each other. So you're like forcing people to spread. And so that is very punishing for something like a Resto Shaman. Are spread,
Yeah.
and also you can't stand and cast, so that means all of Resto Shaman heals pretty much, besides like Riptide, are sit there and cast. So Resto Shaman is unduly punished on that boss versus basically any other healer.
Yeah.
And because they're spread, you also run into range issues on something like Evoker. Evoker is a really good healer, but that's not saying that like in a pug, people are not going to outrange your heals and make it life very frustrating for you.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
you also run into that same style of issue on one of the other notable healing checks in early keys, which was the last boss of Ruby Pools. Where again, you end up with people pretty hard spread in the second phase, and there's a lot of healing that has to happen, or people just die in like 3 seconds. But also, you
Right.
don't really have a lot of opportunity to stand still and cast. You have people that are widely spread. So again, like Evoker and Resto Shaman paying the penalty for that, whereas something like a Resto Druid just doesn't. Just by design, Druid just not having to cast basically ever,
Uh-huh.
and not having any issues healing people. Um, like everybody else pays some penalties for that, and I think fundamentally there's just like a dungeon design thing that there's just Resto Druid just never has to pay any of these penalties. And so they're just always the best healer.
Yeah. 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 So I mean we'll see how this sort of lays out. Cause I think, yeah, there's a bunch that goes into um like what healer ends up being good and how you deal with certain damage at certain points, because yeah, not every healer is created the same. And so like the healing checks also can't be the same. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an interesting conundrum for Blizzard. We'll see how they work it out in Mythic Plus, but yeah, I just thought it was funny that um Yeah, that we saw a no healer key at MDI. Then a bunch of posts come out about this, and then a DPS player writes a healing article for Wowhead. So it's
and they nerf a tank.
yeah, and they nerf a
Yeah.
tank. So no,
Yeah.
good times. So.
If I were a betting man, I would bet on AG being the next DPS healing thing to get nerfed.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. So
But
cool.
we are
I think
over time, and I think we both have stuff to do this afternoon. At least this time we spent less time talking about Entangling.
Slightly.
But that is going to be it for this show today. Thank you all for watching and/or listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can support this show and all the work that goes on over at the Peak of Serenity, over at our Patreon at patreon.com/Peak of Serenity. And of course, come and join the Discord. It is the best place to annoy Anomoly discussions about no healer keys in Mist Lounge.
That's true. I love that. I love those.
You can also talk about them in Brew Lounge and Mist Lounge, but we're not really going to be as receptive. We are probably going to just participate. So that may be more fun for you or less fun, depending on the reaction you want. But that is going to be it for the show today. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.